In the heart of the American West lies Death Valley, a place that got its ominous name for a reason. Here, the asphalt melts the soles of your shoes, reaching 176 degrees Celsius, and the sun mercilessly sucks the moisture out of everything living in a matter of hours. But every year, thousands of tourists come here, unaware that the line between an exciting adventure and a deadly tragedy is thinner than the page of a brochure. From the scorching July of 1996 to April 2021, Death Valley continues to claim its toll from those who underestimate its power. A war veteran who survived the war only to meet his death in peacetime. An elderly woman with her daughter and granddaughter. A student looking for beautiful photos. A German family with young children dreaming of adventure. All found themselves alone in the merciless desert, where the air burns your lungs, mirages distort reality, and the last sip of water determines the line between life and death. Here are 3 stories about people who set out one morning on a routine excursion, unaware that this day would change their lives forever. People whose destinies were shattered by an invisible line beyond which there is no connection, no help, no second chance. Only the scorching sun above their heads and the realization of their own fragility in the face of ancient, indifferent nature. Every choice they make, every decision they take could be their last in a struggle where their own lives are at stake. Death Valley is a place where beauty and danger are woven into one tight knot. Straddling the border of California and Nevada, this national park holds several records, each one a reminder of its ruthless nature. It is the hottest, driest, and lowest national park in the United States. Here in the heart of the Mojave Desert, temperatures regularly exceed the 45 degrees Celsius mark. In 1913, the highest temperature on the planet was recorded here, 56.7 degrees, and even in relatively cool April, the thermometer can read over 30. On the territory of the park, there is both the lowest point of North America, Badwater Trench, located 86 meters below sea level, and mountain peaks, rising to a height of more than 3 kilometers. These majestic gradients create a maze of canyons and gorges where the unprepared traveler can easily get lost. Despite all the dangers, thousands of tourists come here every year to see the golden sands of the dunes and the colorful rocks of the canyons. Many of them take winding backcountry trails far into the backcountry of the park, where cell phone service is non-existent and the nearest help may be hours away. It was here, amidst this silent expanse and dangerous beauty, that a story unfolded in April 2021 that once again reminded why this place got its ominous name. Alexander Lofgren knew firsthand what it was like to overcome challenges. In 2011, he served as a combat engineer in Afghanistan, where he learned how to operate in extreme conditions and make quick decisions. After 4 years of service and an honorable discharge from the U.S. Army, the 32-year-old veteran found a new calling, helping other service members. After earning a bachelor's degree in political science from Arizona State University, Alex began working in the office of Congressman Raul M. Grijalva. As a member of the Wounded Warrior Fellowship Program, he worked to support veterans in southern Arizona by working on the crisis line and helping those in difficult situations. It was in Arizona that he met 27-year-old Emily Henkel. She came to the state through the AmeriCorps Vista program to work for a nonprofit organization helping veterans. It wasn't just the work that brought them together, but a shared passion for traveling and exploring nature. Alex, with his military experience and love of the outdoors, has become a trusted hiking partner for Emily. In early April 2021, the couple decided to take a day trip to Death Valley National Park. The plan was simple: visit the park's popular spots, Artist Drive, Devil's Golf Course, Racetrack, and Badwater Basin, and then return home. They carefully prepared for the trip by taking a supply of water, camping gear, and food for the day. Their white 2018 Subaru Forester was a reliable vehicle that could handle the park's dirt roads. Before leaving, Alex, like a seasoned traveler, filled out a logbook with the planned places to visit. It was a routine precaution that would later play a crucial role in their fate. Neither Alex nor Emily could have guessed that their ordinary trip would change their lives forever and leave an indelible mark on the history of Death Valley National Park. The day began as planned. After driving along the park's main road, the couple decided to turn onto Gold Valley Road, a dirt road designed for four-wheel drive vehicles. This secluded trail was about 13 miles long and went deep into the park, cutting a path through the wilderness. Their Subaru Forester was built for such roads, and at first no problems were anticipated. Around 5:30 p.m., the silence of the wilderness was broken by two sharp pops. Emily felt her heart drop into her heels. As they got out of the car, they found the two tires on the passenger side had been punctured by sharp rocks. With only one spare tire, the situation was becoming critical. The sun was already slipping toward dusk, coloring the rocks in disturbing shades of red. They found themselves 22 miles off the main road, in one of the most remote areas of the park. There wasn't a soul around. Phones showed no signal, no shade, no water source nearby. Nothing to help in a situation like this. The lifeless landscape stretched out in all directions, reminding why this place is called Death Valley. Survival mode kicked in. Alex, with his military experience, methodically began to assess the situation. They carefully checked their supplies: a few liters of water, enough for 3 days, a couple of cans of canned food, flashlights, and a basic survival kit. Emily laid out a map on the hood of the car, while Alex studied the terrain around them. They had a decision to make, and their lives depended on it. After much deliberation, they decided not to go back the way they had come. Instead, they mapped out a route to Mormon Point via a mountain pass. The route was shorter, but considerably more difficult. As they prepared to leave in the morning, they left a note in the car. 2 flat tires heading for Mormon Point have a 3-day supply of water. Around the car, they had laid out an arrow made of rocks indicating the direction they were headed. After settling into the car for the night, they tried to conserve their strength for the challenge ahead. The temperature was dropping rapidly, a typical contrast of the desert, where the heat of the day is replaced by the penetrating cold of the night. Tomorrow, they were to cross one of the most dangerous sections of the park, where steep canyons and sheer cliffs could be either a path to escape or a death trap. The night silence of Death Valley seemed especially oppressive, as if foreshadowing the trials that lay ahead. At 4 o'clock in the morning, when the sky was still studded with stars, Alex and Emily left their car. An early exit was necessary. They had to get through the difficult mountain terrain before the heat of the day set in. The route to Mormon Point took them over a mountain pass on a marked trail, but the terrain left no room for error. The path traveled through a canyon sandwiched between the steep slopes of the Black Mountains Range. Ancient cliffs, formed by millions of years of geologic activity, loomed overhead in dark silhouettes. The trail gradually narrowed into a narrow passageway between the steep canyon walls. With each step, the terrain became more challenging. The rock here consisted of a mixture of metamorphic formations, making every step potentially dangerous. Steep slopes were dotted with sharp rocks, and the trail often looped along the edge of cliffs. Even for the experienced hikers that Alex and Emily were, this route presented a serious challenge. The April sun began to rise above the horizon, gradually filling the canyon with light and warmth. The temperature was rising quickly, reminding them why even at this time of year Death Valley remains one of the most dangerous places in the country. The shadows from the rocks that provided temporary shelter from the sun grew shorter and shorter. Moving forward, they reached a place where the canyon narrowed even more. Here, the trail led them to an unexpected obstacle, a 70-foot waterfall. A vertical rock barrier blocked the path like an impregnable wall. It was an established climbing route, requiring special equipment, ropes and safety harnesses, which of course they did not have. They were faced with a tough choice that would change everything. The sheer wall of the waterfall, as high as a 7-story building, towered silently above them like the final frontier between life and death. Here, In this narrow canyon, they had to make a decision, the price of which could be unimaginably high. Alex began to scrutinize the rock, trying to find natural ledges that could serve as a support for the descent. As a former military man, he was used to assessing risks and finding solutions in difficult situations. Emily watched his actions nervously. "No unnecessary risks," she insisted as Alex began to carefully descend the cliff. "One step at a time. Take your time. Be careful." Her voice echoed off the canyon walls as Alex slowly made his way down the steep surface. Suddenly, the movement stopped. "I can't find where to put my foot." Alex's voice sounded strained. "I'll have to climb back up." But as he tried to get back up, the irreparable happened. "I'm losing my footing." Those words made Emily's heart quicken. "What do you mean you're losing your footing?" she shouted in panic, frantically looking around for anything that might help. But it was too late. Moments later, Alex was tumbling 70 feet off the ground. What happened next was the scariest moment of Emily's life. By some miracle, Alex was still alive after the fall. He was able to yell to her to call for help. But in this wilderness, with no communication and miles away from civilization, help seemed out of reach. Emily was faced with an impossible choice. Moments before Alex fell, she had spotted a possible route of descent on the left side of the canyon, a narrow crevice in the rock. It was a dangerous path where any mistake could cost lives, but the only way to get to Alex. Despite her racing heart and trembling hands, she made her decision. In that moment, she had only one thing on her mind. She had to be there for him, no matter what it took. Clinging to the sharp edges of the cleft, Emily began her slow descent. The rock crumbled beneath her hands. Every movement could be her last. About halfway down, 30 feet from the ground, she was trapped. The walls of the cleft were too wide to grab onto. There was no turning back. Throwing her backpack down in the desperate hope of cushioning her fall, she closed her eyes for a moment and did the only thing she had left to do. Emily unclenched her hands. The impact with the ground was like an explosion of pain. Her ankle twisted unnaturally and snapped with a crunch. But in that moment, driven by adrenaline and overwhelming fear for Alex, she felt almost no pain. Limping and stumbling, she made it to him, but faced the harsh reality that the 70-foot fall had left Alex with injuries incompatible with life. On this Easter Sunday, April 4th, 2021, Alexander Lofgren died in her arms. As the first wave of shock subsided, Emily realized the horror of her situation. She was on a narrow ledge in the middle of a steep canyon with a broken ankle. Alex's body lay nearby, but the worst part was that there was another cliff ahead of them, a 100-foot drop in elevation, making further travel impossible. Even without her injury, she had no chance of overcoming this barrier. The first day was filled with despair, guilt, and endless what-ifs. Every glance at Alex's motionless body brought a new wave of pain, sharper than from a broken ankle. Just a few hours ago, they'd made plans, and now... Emily realized these thoughts wouldn't help her get out of here, but dealing with her emotions was nearly impossible. Taking inventory of her supplies, she realized that she had water and some food that they had packed the night before. A survival kit was also in her backpack. Using the materials at hand, Emily built a rudimentary shelter, stacking rocks for protection from the blazing sun and the piercing night wind. Every movement was difficult, physical pain mixed with emotional devastation. Each day around 2:30 in the afternoon, the sun peeked into the canyon, turning the narrow ledge into a red-hot oven. For the next 4 hours, survival became a real challenge. Without the ability to shelter from the direct rays of the sun, being in one of the hottest places on Earth, every minute seemed like an eternity. During those hours, the heat was so unbearable that even grief was overridden by the primal instinct to survive. Emily realized that she was completely dependent on the rescuers. But hope of rescue seemed elusive. This was such a remote and inaccessible place that the chances of being found seemed minimal, and yet she did not give up. Every day she told herself, "They will find us. We will be saved." Sometimes she caught herself saying "we," and a new wave of realization of loss came over her head. The nights were especially hard. The temperature in the desert was plummeting, and the sounds of Death Valley at night and the impenetrable darkness added to the feeling of utter loneliness. In the darkness, reality seemed distorted, nightmarish. The presence of Alex's body was a constant reminder of the tragedy, but the thought of leaving him was unbearable. He had been there all this time, so close physically and so unattainably distant. In those long hours of the night, Emily would often talk to him, telling him of her fears and hopes, of how much she wanted to live and how much she missed him. All that was left was to wait and hope that someone would find them in this vast stone maze. Those 5 days in the Death Valley Mountains could have been an eternity, but while Emily was fighting for her life, a massive rescue operation was unfolding outside the canyon. When the couple didn't return home by the evening of April 4th as planned, their loved ones sensed something amiss. By April 6th, worry had turned into certainty. Something had gone wrong. The Inyo County Sheriff's Office immediately sprang into action. A full-scale search operation was launched, bringing together multiple agencies. Rescuers methodically checked every hotel and motel in the Death Valley area. The California Highway Patrol disseminated information about the missing through all possible channels. The National Park Service utilized all available resources, from rangers to volunteers. The U.S. National Park Service joined the search, providing additional resources and experienced personnel. Search teams worked day and night, scouring the park's vast territory of more than 13,600 square kilometers. It was a race against time. Everyone realized that in the desert conditions, the count was days. On April 7th, the operation expanded. Search teams thoroughly surveyed the entire main Death Valley Highway, stopping at every monument and landmark. In the hands of the rescuers was an important piece of evidence: the logbook Alex had filled out before the trip. It was like a treasure map in reverse. The rescuers methodically checked every location listed: Artist Drive with its colorful cliffs, the bizarre salt formations of Devil's Golf Course, the mysterious Racetrack Valley, and the vast white wasteland of Badwater Basin. But all of these checks were inconclusive. On April 8th, a long-awaited breakthrough occurred. During another aerial patrol, pilots spotted a white Subaru Forester. The car was parked on Gold Valley Road, a remote dirt road that wasn't even on their original route. That discovery was a turning point in the search. In the car's interior, rescuers found a note that finally pointed in the right direction. 2 flat tires heading for Mormon Point have 3 days' supply of water. Now that the search teams knew where to look, the operation entered a crucial phase. Every slow minute could determine the fate for the missing travelers' lives. Early the next day, early in the morning, the silence of the canyon was broken by the distant sound of engines. At first, Emily thought she was imagining it. She had visualized this moment so many times over the days. But the sound grew more and more distinct. Her heart beat faster, the first time she'd heard a sign of human presence in 5 days. As the noise of the helicopter grew louder, she began desperately waving her makeshift signal, fighting the growing panic. The U.S. Navy helicopter appeared from behind the rocks, and the rumble of the propellers echoed off the canyon walls. The moment the crew spotted them was both a triumph and the beginning of a new challenge. The helicopter hovered over the canyon, but rescue proved to be a nearly impossible task, even for experienced military rescuers. The narrow canyon walls had become a real trap. The powerful airflow from the blades created dangerous turbulence. At first, the 2 rescuers who had rappelled down the ropes could not even reach the ledge where Emily was. Wind gusts tossed them from side to side, threatening to smash them against the rock walls. 20 minutes of strained attempts seemed like an eternity. The helicopter maneuvered, trying to find the best position. The slightest mistake in this stone corridor threatened disaster. Finally, after several risky maneuvers, the rescuers reached Emily. Now the equally difficult task of getting her upstairs was ahead of them. Acting with extreme care, they secured her in the rescue stretcher. Every movement was calibrated. In these conditions, even a small misstep could cost a life. Emily squeezed her eyes shut as the stretcher began to rise. After a few agonizingly long minutes, she dared to look down. Beneath her stretched a vast landscape of beige cliffs, the same maze that had nearly become her grave. Emily was taken to a nearby hospital where doctors immediately began treatment. Her broken ankle required emergency surgery. The decision to keep her shoes on during the 5-day ordeal, despite the intense pain, proved to be life-saving. It prevented critical swelling and helped save her foot. The next 6 days in the hospital merged into one endless stream for Emily. Physical pain mixed with emotional trauma, and the rescue seemed like a bittersweet triumph. She had survived, but the price of that survival was unimaginably high. Every time she closed her eyes, she was taken back to that moment in the canyon when everything changed forever. News of the tragedy quickly spread across the country. Alex and Emily's story touched the hearts of many people, especially in the veteran community. Alex, who dedicated his life after his military service to helping other veterans, left behind a legacy of service and caring for others. Shortly after being discharged from the hospital, Emily returned to her hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. Physical recovery was a long time coming, but even more difficult was dealing with the emotional wounds. She realized that her life was divided into a before and after of those April days in Death Valley. The canyon tragedy changed more than just Emily's life. It made many people think twice about safety in national parks. Rescuers emphasized the importance of careful preparation for traveling to remote areas, the need to have reliable means of communication, and to inform loved ones of their plans. Even experienced travelers, which Alex and Emily were, could encounter unforeseen circumstances in the wilderness. Alex Lofgren's tragic death was not in vain. Congressman Raul M. Grijalva, whose office Alex worked in, initiated a bill called the Alexander Lofgren Veterans in Parks Act. This legislation would fulfill what Alex believed in so much, making America's natural beauty more accessible to veterans. Less than 3 months after the tragedy, on July 1, 2021, the bill was introduced in Congress. It passed through the House of Representatives with record speed, already receiving approval on July 29th. And on December 27, 2021, just 8 months after Alex's death, the President signed into law a bill giving all Gold Star veterans and family members the right to free lifetime admission to national parks and federal recreational areas. For Alex, nature has always been a place of healing and renewal. As an Afghanistan veteran, he understood the therapeutic power of wilderness better than most. Even while working in his congressman's office, he continued to help veterans by answering crisis line calls and supporting those in difficult situations. Now his name is forever linked to the law, helping other veterans find their path to healing through communing with nature. Alex and Emily's story is more than just a chronicle of the tragedy in Death Valley. It is a reminder that even the most seasoned travelers must treat wildlife with the utmost respect. It's a story about how love can push us to do desperate things, and how tragedy can turn into a legacy of helping others. Death Valley continues to attract thousands of visitors with its rugged beauty. Its canyons and deserts remain as majestic and dangerous. But now, thanks to Alex Lofgren, these places are more accessible to those who, like him, have dedicated their lives to serving the country. His name carved into the law has become a symbol of hope and a reminder that even in the darkest tragedy, a light can be born to light the way for others. Death Valley is not to be taken lightly. Stretching along California's eastern border, this national park is a sun-scorched depression surrounded by sharp mountain ranges. It is home to the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, Badwater Basin, 280 feet below sea level, and is also home to the highest temperature on Earth, 134.6 degrees Celsius. The Death Valley landscape is a mosaic of lifeless salt flats, scatterings of sharp rocks, and rare oases where deep groundwater bursts to the surface, creating tiny islands of life in a sea of unrelenting heat. Despite all the dangers, about 1 million tourists come here every year to see the beauty of the golden sands of the dunes and the colorful rocks of the canyons. Every year, dozens of tourists get into trouble in this rugged region. Park rangers tirelessly warn of the need for thorough preparation. A full tank of fuel, a water supply, at least 4 liters per person per day, paper maps, and off-road vehicles for remote areas. Safety in Death Valley is not just a recommendation, but a matter of survival. Cell phone service is virtually non-existent in the vast expanse of the park. Outside of tourist centers such as Furness Creek, one finds oneself completely cut off from the outside world. Each year, park officials record numerous incidents requiring search and rescue operations. And the July 2010 incident reminds us once again why this place has its ominous name. Donna Cooper has never turned down an opportunity to travel. At 62 years old, this resident of the small town of Pahrump, Nevada, still has the youthful enthusiasm of a pioneer and an unquenchable thirst for new experiences. Despite all the trials that have befallen her, a serious car accident in her youth, raising 8 children and a serious illness in Haiti in early 2010. Each crisis Donna has overcome with remarkable calm and determination. "I believe traveling makes us richer," she often said as she planned her next trip. In recent years, Donna crossed much of the American West, showing its beauty to her traveling companions. Next to Donna, on this July morning in 2010, were 2 young girls. Her 17-year-old daughter, Gina, was energetic, with a lively mind and a love of adventure inherited from her mother. There was a special bond between them based on mutual trust. The third participant was Jenny Lun, a 19-year-old student from Hong Kong. Arriving in America in May, she moved into the Cooper home on a cultural exchange program and quickly became almost a member of the family. Their transportation was a modest Hyundai Accent, a compact silver sedan. The car was ideal for city streets and paved highways, but was not designed for the rigors of off-roading. However, Donna, like most Nevadans, was used to driving considerable distances, and the car rarely let her down. Their packing was short that morning. Donna had put a few blankets and a basic toolkit in the trunk, a habit developed from years of traveling through the western states. The cabin held a few bottles of water, a bag of chips, a couple of apples and cookies, enough for a day trip, but woefully inadequate for what lay ahead. The fuel tank was only a quarter full, which under normal circumstances would be enough for about 100–120 miles. Driving out of Pahrump, Donna informed her friend Charlene that they were going to visit Scotty's castle in Death Valley. She had driven past it many times, but had never stopped to visit. Now, with 2 inquisitive companions, the moment seemed perfect. Neither of them could have guessed that a simple tourist trip would turn into an incredible struggle for survival in one of the most ruthless places on the planet. A challenge that would test not only their physical strength, but also their character, resourcefulness, and will to live. Thursday began with clear skies and anticipation of new discoveries. The sun was just rising above the horizon when the silver Hyundai Accent pulled out of Pahrump, a small town just an hour's drive from Death Valley. Donna Cooper, hands on the steering wheel, was enjoying the morning chill, realizing that by afternoon the temperature would soar to its usual July extremes. Gina and Jenny chatted softly in the back seat, discussing their upcoming visit to Scotty's castle, a mysterious landmark lost among the desert landscape. Donna occasionally glanced at them in the rearview mirror, pleased with their enthusiasm. Scotty's castle, officially known as Death Valley Ranch, was a 2-story Spanish colonial-style villa built between 1922 and 1931. Its history was filled with myth and intrigue. Chicago millionaire Albert Johnson erected the mansion for his ailing wife, hoping that the dry climate of Death Valley would help her health. However, he was made famous by the adventurer Walter Scott, nicknamed Scotty, who claimed to have built the castle with the proceeds of a fictitious gold mine. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they arrived at the castle gates. The contrast between the stark desert and the Spanish mansion with its pool, fountains, and lush gardens was almost surreal. Donna bought 3 tickets, the last transaction that would later help her relatives begin their search. For 2 hours, the women wandered the cool corridors, admiring the antique furniture and unusual interior. The castle kept pleasantly cool despite the temperature outside, thanks to the thick walls. The guide told stories about Scotty and his fantastic tales that attracted curious visitors to this remote location. Leaving the castle around 3 in the afternoon, they were greeted by a heat wave. The temperature exceeded 134.6 degrees Celsius, the air shivering over the red-hot asphalt. It was then that Donna noticed a sign for Racetrack Playa, a flat, dried-up lake known for the mysterious phenomenon of moving rocks. Over the years, rocks have left long trails, as if someone was pushing them across the bottom of the dried lake. The phenomenon, which had no scientific explanation until 2014, intrigued scientists and tourists alike. "I've always wanted to see this," Donna said, looking at a map of the park. Gina and Jenny enthusiastically supported the idea. Why not see another unique attraction? Donna pulled out her navigator and typed in Racetrack Playa. The device, programmed to find the shortest route, calculated the path and gave directions. According to the park's official recommendations, Racetrack Playa was 27 miles from the nearest paved road and could only be reached by a high-clearance vehicle. The women drove out of the parking lot of Scotty's castle, unaware of how their spontaneous decision would turn out. The Hyundai Accent, reliable on city streets, was completely unprepared for the rigors that awaited it on the abandoned trails of Death Valley. They traveled west on Highway 267. Soon the asphalt changed to gravel, and they reached Tea Kettle Junction, a notable intersection named for an unusual tradition. Hanging from a signpost were dozens of tea kettles left behind by travelers. Some were covered with signatures and dates, while others were decorated with drawings and messages. This place marked the boundary between relatively passable roads and true tracklessness. Gina, who had replaced her mother at the wheel, stopped the car. Donna checked the GPS. The signs gave conflicting information. One directed to Racetrack Playa. The other warned of a difficult road not recommended for regular cars. Gina turned left, following the GPS directions. Their Hyundai began to make slow progress on the bumpy road, which became increasingly narrow and uneven. The car's low ground clearance forced them to move at a snail's pace. 10 miles later, Racetrack Playa never appeared. Instead, the road began to climb up into the mountains. What was once a dirt road had become an abandoned trail. "Let's ask for directions back to Scotty's castle," Gina suggested, mentioning the GPS navigator. She pressed a few buttons, canceling the current route and requesting a new one. But it was here, in the deep canyons of Death Valley, that technology failed them. The satellite signal was weak and intermittent, forcing the GPS to constantly recalculate the route. The sun was slowly sloping toward the horizon, casting long shadows on the rocky ground. The temperature remained above 113 degrees Fahrenheit, but even more alarming was the fuel tank arrow. It was inexorably approaching the red zone after more than 100 miles of off-road driving, where fuel consumption was much higher than normal. Cell phones showed not a single streak of signal. They found themselves completely cut off from the world, wandering through a maze of mountain trails, taking them further and further away from civilization. The odometer read more than 180 miles since leaving Scotty's castle, and with each new mile they were running out of fuel. Their situation was becoming more and more critical. When the sun was almost hidden behind the ridge, Donna took over again. The car traveled another few hundred yards and stopped. The engine died, plunging them into the silence of the desert. There were no lights around, no sign of human presence, just the majestic silent canyons and the darkening sky. "Looks like we'll have to spend the night here," Donna said calmly, though inwardly she was well aware of the danger of their situation. The three women were trapped in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, with minimal water, no communication, and no fuel. The first rays of Friday's sun mercilessly exposed the reality of their situation. The odometer showed just over 200 miles since leaving Scotty's castle. They had gotten deep into the wilderness of Death Valley. "We must act," Donna said, assessing the situation with a calmness developed from years of overcoming hardship. They took inventory of their meager supplies: the last bottle of water, 2 apples, leftover chips, and a few cookies. Gina was the first to get out of the car and cringed at the scalding air. The temperature was already climbing toward 113 degrees Celsius, and it was only morning. She began picking up rocks. Slowly, stone by stone, large letters appeared on an open patch of ground. "Help." The letters were large enough, about 13 feet long, to be seen from the air. Meanwhile, Donna and Jenny busied themselves with finding water. Being extremely thirsty, they tried to extract moisture from cacti and pine needles, but the results were minimal. Just a little bitter liquid, not enough to quench their thirst. They shared the last bottle of water equally, in tiny gulps, realizing they had to stretch their supplies as long as possible. Toward noon, the heat became unbearable. The air seemed to melt over the rocks, their skin burning even in the shade of the car. Jenny, faced with such extreme conditions for the first time, felt her fear and anxiety growing by the hour. As a foreigner, far from home, she had relied entirely on Donna's experience. Airplanes occasionally flew over them, small dots in the vast sky. The women tried every available method of signaling. Gina used the CD as a mirror, reflecting the sunlight. Jenny waved a bright yellow emergency blanket, but the planes continued on their way, oblivious to their desperate attempts to get attention. By Friday evening, Gina decided to explore the neighborhood. She hiked about 2 miles up the rocky trail, hoping to find help, or at least a better view of the terrain to determine their position. As she climbed to a small elevation, all she saw was vast desert. No sign of civilization, just rocks and sparse vegetation as far as the eye could see. Meanwhile, in faraway Florida, Donna's daughter, Sky Cooper, was recovering from gallbladder surgery. She tried to call her mother several times, but all calls went to voicemail. It didn't cause alarm at first. Donna often went on spontaneous trips, but when 24 hours passed without word, Sky began to worry. She checked her mother's credit card accounts and found the last transaction: 3 tickets to Scotty's castle, dated Thursday, 1 p.m. Nothing after that. In Pahrump, Charlene Dean, who had been keeping an eye on Donna's house, was also starting to worry. After contacting Sky, they decided to take action and contacted authorities. But neither the Nye and Inyo County sheriffs nor the Death Valley Rangers could begin a full-fledged search immediately. Too little information, too vast an area. On Saturday morning, something that could only be called a miracle happened at Donna's car. When they had already lost all hope that the car would start, Donna decided to try again, just to be safe. She turned the key, and to everyone's amazement, the engine came to life. Perhaps the small amount of fuel had redistributed in the tank overnight, or the battery had regained a minimal charge. The reason was unimportant. What mattered was that they had a chance. The resurrected car had become their lifeline. Donna instantly went from relief to action, realizing that every second the engine was running was precious. "Get in quickly," she commanded, and a moment later all three were inside. Donna drove the car in the most fuel-efficient mode possible, going in neutral on the downhills and picking up speed rapidly on the flat stretches before the uphills. If the car stalled now, there might not be a second miracle. At the bottom, the terrain leveled out, and a small salt flat opened up before them, glistening in the midday sun. In the distance, they noticed something unexpected: a wire fence, a locked gate, and some live trees. "Look! There might be people there!" Gina exclaimed, pointing to the trailer standing behind the trees. The car was slowly approaching the fence when the engine stalled again. The last drops of fuel had run out, but it didn't matter anymore. They had found a sign of civilization. The three women struggled to climb out of the red-hot car. The heat was unbearable, the temperature exceeding 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground literally burned under their feet, even through the soles of their sneakers. Sweat evaporated instantly, and dehydration progressed by the minute. They walked around the wire fence and approached the gate. The abandoned camp consisted of 2 or 3 old trailers surrounding a wooden porch. The buildings looked abandoned, but in relatively good condition. Donna knocked on doors, calling out, but there was no answer. Going around the largest trailer, Donna found a treasure, a coiled garden hose connected to a water faucet. With trembling hands, she turned the vent. Seconds stretched into eternity as something rumbled in the pipes. Then the water came, hot, metallic, but life-giving and real. The three women fell to their knees, greedily gulping water straight from the hose despite its scalding temperature. The first sips after nearly 2 days of thirst were like coming back to life. They filled every container they could find, empty bottles, soda cans, even plastic containers from the dumpster. No one knew if the water would flow tomorrow. Gina, showing resourcefulness, tried to break into the trailers. In one of them, Jenny was able to climb through a narrow window and found a few cans of canned beans and chili, a half-empty box of spaghetti, and oatmeal inside. Not much, but enough to keep her strength up for a few more days. It was unbearably hot inside the trailers. The sun heated the metal walls like an oven. They pulled the mattresses out onto the veranda, where at least there was shade. Donna opened the cans of food, and they ate for the first time in hours, silent and focused, as if performing a sacred ritual. By now, the mechanism for the rescue had already been set in motion. Charlene and Skye had contacted authorities in several counties. The California Highway Police activated a helicopter to search the remote areas of the park where Donna's credit card had last been used. Rangers provided maps of abandoned roads and coordinated ground searches. Ironically, it was cell phones, useless in the mountains due to lack of signal, that provided information on the women's approximate location, thanks to data on the last tower when they still had some connection. In the abandoned camp that became their refuge, the women kept trying to signal. They reinforced the help sign on the car, kept waving a yellow blanket at the sound of airplanes. The sun was preparing to set as Gina took an impromptu bath in the trailer, using the water from the hose to relieve the fatigue and grime of the last few days. Donna helped her wash her hair, just like when Gina was a little girl. This simple moment of maternal care in the midst of extreme disaster seemed almost surreal. By early Saturday, the third day of their ordeal, the heat seemed even more relentless. Temperatures soared past 122 degrees earlier than usual, as if the desert itself wanted to test the limits of human endurance. The abandoned campground was their temporary shelter, but conditions were far from comfortable. Mattresses dragged out on the veranda provided minimal protection from the blazing sun, but even in the shade the temperature exceeded 113 degrees Celsius. Every 15 minutes the women had to douse themselves with water from a hose. Donna continued to remain outwardly calm, but inwardly she was calculating her options. If help didn't arrive in the next 24 hours, they would have to take the desperate step of trying to walk to the main road. In this heat, that would be tantamount to suicide, but the alternative, starving to death in an abandoned camp, was no better. Gina became the physical leader of the group. Her youth and energy allowed her to actively continue her signaling attempts. She regularly went out into the open with a yellow emergency blanket, waving it at every sound of an airplane. On the hood of the car, in large letters of dust, was written, "Help, call police." She also tried lighting a signal fire, but the dry branches only burned, producing no discernible smoke. Jenny, the most vulnerable of the three, held on solely because of Donna's support. The culture shock of facing an extreme situation in a foreign country heightened her fear. Meanwhile, the search operation was gaining momentum. Charlene and Skye called every possible authority, the sheriffs of Nye and Inyo counties, California Highway Police, National Park Rangers. The story of the 3 missing women began to spread in localized news outlets in Nevada and California. The helicopter methodically scoured remote areas of the park, following routes that could lead from Scotty's Castle to Racetrack Playa. Pilots Tyler Jones and Scott Steele, experienced in search and rescue operations, knew that with each passing hour, the chances of finding the women alive were diminishing. The rangers, meanwhile, were interviewing other hikers, checking log books at park entrances, and analyzing data from surveillance cameras outside Scotty's Castle. The puzzle was slowly coming together. 3 women in a silver Hyundai Accent had probably headed for Racetrack Playa without sufficient preparation. The sun had already begun its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the 3 women's weary faces. It was the 3rd day of their ordeal in the merciless desert. The temperature was finally beginning to drop, bringing a small relief after the hellish heat of the day. Donna, Gina, and Jenny were gathered on the veranda again, sharing canned beans, perhaps their last meal before deciding to march on foot to civilization. Jenny sat on the veranda watching the sky, a habit they had developed over the days. Any movement in the air could mean rescue. Suddenly she heard it, a distant but distinct and growing sound. At first she thought it was an auditory hallucination, a mirage for her ears caused by overheating and hope. But the sound grew louder and more distinct. "Come out! Come out!" Jenny shouted, jumping to her feet and grabbing the yellow blanket. Donna ran out of the trailer, Gina hastily pulling on clothes. Jenny was already frantically waving the blanket around in the open where they could be spotted from the air. The sound was becoming deafening, throbbing in their hearts along with hope. And then they saw it. A blue and white helicopter with a California Highway Patrol emblem circling over the abandoned campground. From the loudspeaker came the pilot's clear voice. "You're safe." 3 simple words that meant the end of the nightmare. Tears streamed down Gina's cheeks, mixing with dust and sweat. Jenny continued to wave the blanket around as if she couldn't believe they'd been spotted. Donna just stood there, her face expressing deep relief after days of unspoken tension. 2 emergency medical technicians emerged from the helicopter. They carried bottles of water, real cold water that the women hadn't seen in 3 days. One of the paramedics took Donna's wrist, checking her pulse. "We were just about to pronounce you dead and fly you back to base," he said. The words hit Donna like a fist. They were so close to going undiscovered, doomed to a slow death from thirst and heat. After an initial examination, medics offered 2 options. A helicopter could take them to Lone Pine, the nearest town, but one at a time, which meant a long wait for 2. Or they could wait for the ranger, who was already on his way with a canister of gasoline and clear instructions on how to get out to the highway. The women chose the second option. Now that they had been found, they preferred to stick together until the end. About an hour passed. Sunset colored the desert in golden tones as a ranger's jeep pulled up to the camp. A tall man in uniform stepped out of the vehicle carrying a 5-gallon canister of gasoline. To the women, this simple canister looked more valuable than gold. The ranger helped pour fuel into the Hyundai's tank, then unfolded a map on the hood of the car. "You're here," he indicated a point on the map. "You need to follow this road east about 15 miles. It will take you out to Highway 190. From there, it's another 20 miles to Furnace Creek. There's a medical center and stores there." The instructions were clear and simple. The women thanked their rescuers, gathered their few belongings, and got into the car. Donna turned the key and the engine started again. This time they knew exactly the way home. The women drove in silence, still not fully realizing that their ordeal was coming to an end. From time to time, Donna checked the map the ranger had given them. They didn't trust electronic devices this time, preferring paper and the clear directions of someone who knew the area. Dusk was settling in, and lights shone ahead like beacons, the first signs of human presence in 3 long days. Highway 190 greeted them with smooth asphalt that seemed like a luxury after the potholes and rocky off-ramps. Donna turned the wheel toward Furness Creek, the park's tourist center, where help was already waiting for them. By the time they arrived at Furness Creek, news of the miraculous rescue of the three women had already spread. Medics were waiting for them, ready to provide assistance. Despite 3 days in extreme conditions, the physical condition of all three was better than could have been expected. Donna, Gina, and Jenny were suffering from dehydration and exhaustion, but thanks to the water and canned food found in the abandoned camp and their own resourcefulness, more serious consequences were avoided. At the medical station, they were greeted with cautious surprise. It's not every day that people survive after so many days in July's Death Valley. Donna was immediately put on a saline drip, and Gina and Jenny were given special electrolyte drinks. The doctors examined each of them carefully, paying particular attention to signs of heat stroke or sunburn. By this time, the phones were already ringing off the hook. Skye Cooper was in tears talking to her mother, thanking heaven for saving them. Charlene Dean was preparing the house in Pahrump for Donna's return. Jenny's parents in Hong Kong, awakened in the middle of the night by a call with news of their daughter's rescue, couldn't believe she had survived such an ordeal. After medical examinations and procedures, the women were allowed to rest at the Furness Creek Motel. A clean bed, air-conditioned air, and cool tap water, simple comforts that now seemed like incredible luxuries. They slept long and deep, without nightmares or worries, knowing that the worst was over. The next day, the Rangers arranged transportation to Pahrump. Before leaving, the Ranger Station Chief invited the women in for a brief conversation. He was interested in the details of their journey, especially the decision to follow the GPS directions through Tea Kettle Junction. The information they provided was invaluable in preventing similar incidents in the future. But most important were the quiet moments when Donna, Gina, and Jenny were finally in the safety of home, realizing how close they had come to the line beyond which there was no return, and how much the ordeal had brought them together. The events in Death Valley left a mark on each of the women's lives. The physical effects, dry skin, fatigue, and slight dehydration, quickly passed, but the psychological impact was more profound. "I didn't doubt for a second that we were going to make it out," Donna said in an interview on the 20 by 20 program a few months later. Her confidence and calm during the crisis helped the group survive, confirming life experience as an invaluable resource. For Gina, the ordeal was a turning point. Inspired by the work of the paramedics who saved them, she enrolled in nursing school, determined to dedicate her life to helping others in critical situations. Jenny returned to Hong Kong, but the experience created an unbreakable bond with the Cooper family. Less than a year later, she came to America again, already as a university student, living in their home. The survival experience taught her not to be afraid of hardship in a foreign country. In 2011, ABC organized a reunion between the women and their rescuers to film a segment of 20 by 20. When the helicopter landed and pilots Tyler Jones and Scott Steele got out, Donna was the first to cross the space separating them. Hugs, tears of gratitude, unspoken words. The moment was filled with genuine emotion. The story of the three women became a textbook example for the Death Valley Rangers. They coined the term death by GPS and reinforced the warnings, always take paper maps. GPS can guide you on impassable roads. A week without GPS is always better than a day without water. The updated brochures now included the requirement of a full tank of fuel and a gallon of water per person for the day. The case reminded the world that even in the age of technology, nature requires respect and preparation, but it also showed the strength of the human spirit, resourcefulness, and the importance of remaining calm in the face of danger. The three women entered Death Valley as ordinary travelers and came out with a story of survival that is part of the legacy of this harsh but beautiful place. The famous thermometer in Death Valley only tells half the story. It measures the air temperature, but it doesn't register even more deadly things. Disorientation, when every landscape looks the same. Panic, when you suddenly realize there is no water. The illusory confidence of a map leading nowhere. Death Valley is a geological phenomenon sandwiched between the steep ridges of Panamint and Amargosa. Lying 282 feet below sea level, it forms a giant natural heat trap. The hot air, unable to escape the surrounding mountains, sinks back down, heating up even more from the pressure. These pockets of hot air create one of the hottest places on the planet. In July 1996, the air temperature here reached 116 degrees Fahrenheit, and the surface of the sand heated up to 180 degrees, enough to melt the soles of shoes. The summer of 1996 went down in the park's history as one of the hottest, more than 40 days with temperatures above 120 to see. In such weather, the human body loses up to 2 liters of fluid per hour, making the lack of water a death sentence. The contrast between deadly reality and mesmerizing beauty makes Death Valley a magnet for tourists from around the world. They come to see the surreal landscapes, but rarely leave their air-conditioned cars in the summer. For park rangers, Death Valley remains a place of respect, not frivolous adventure. The desert does not forgive mistakes, they repeat, pointing to the most important rule of survival: never leave your car in case of a breakdown. This rule, written in the blood of previous victims, has become a sacred mantra for everyone who knows the true face of Death Valley. In July 1996, 4 German tourists crossed the invisible line between adventure and disaster when they turned onto the dirt road of Anvil Canyon, a decision that would turn their vacation photos into evidence of one of the most mysterious incidents in the history of American national parks. Egbert Rimkus, a 34-year-old architect from Dresden, looked at the world with the confident gaze of a man accustomed to measuring space and calculating proportions. His life in Germany had not been easy. Divorce from Heike Weber, custody battles over their son. But he saw this trip to the United States as a new chapter, an opportunity to get closer to 11-year-old Georg and strengthen his relationship with Cornelia Mayer, his 27-year-old girlfriend. Cornelia, who owned a thriving business in Germany, was the more pragmatic of the two. It was in her name that they rented a green Plymouth Voyager in Los Angeles on July 8th, after arriving from Seattle. Her 4-year-old son Max, a blond boy with curious eyes, made the group look like a real family. In 3 weeks, they traveled a significant portion of the U.S. West Coast, from the beaches of San Clemente to the casinos of Las Vegas, where they stayed at the Treasure Island Resort. Their photos, later found in their luggage, showed ordinary happy tourists admiring the American landscape. It was a simple story that could have been told by hundreds of other European travelers. But there was one detail that would later take on a sinister tone. While in Las Vegas, Egbert contacted Heike, asking to borrow money. When she refused, he transferred $2,500 from his bank account. This transaction indicated financial constraints that could influence their future decisions, choosing routes, hotels, and gas expenses. The German tourists viewed the American West through the prism of European romantic notions, shaped by the books of Karl May and Hollywood westerns. For them, the desert was not a deadly trap, but an exotic adventure, a backdrop for photos they would show their friends when they returned home. None of them had any experience surviving in conditions where temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees and the nearest source of water could be dozens of miles away. They differed from other tourists in their approach to planning. Instead of comfortable hotels, they sometimes chose to sleep under the open sky, as evidenced by the Coleman sleeping bag and tent found later in their car. Max's toys scattered around the minivan were a reminder that despite their thirst for adventure, this was an ordinary family, not prepared for extreme challenges. The family was supposed to return the car to Los Angeles on July 26th. The next day, they had a flight to Germany. These dates set a tight time frame for the trip, another factor that could have pushed them to make risky decisions. On Monday, July 22nd in 1996, the thermometer in Furnace Creek in Death Valley read 179,8. On the same day, Egbert and Cornelia drove into the national park with their children and stopped at the visitor center. There they bought 2 copies of a German-language guidebook to Death Valley. This choice confirmed their normal tourist interest, but their failure to ask the rangers about the safety of the routes would later prove fatal. By this time, their financial reserves were clearly dwindling. The rented minivan had already traveled a considerable distance, from Los Angeles to San Clemente, from there to Las Vegas, and now to Death Valley. There were less than 5 days left before the return to the airport, and Yosemite National Park was still ahead. Simple logistics prompted them to look for the shortest routes. Studying a map of Death Valley, not a modern GPS, but a paper one with blurred markings of dirt roads, they saw a potential route through the western foothills. To avoid a long detour along the eastern border of the park, they could cross the mountainous terrain via Mangle Pass, reach the other side, and head straight for Yosemite. On the map, the road looked passable. There was no warning that it required a four-wheel drive vehicle with high ground clearance, rather than a Plymouth Voyager minivan with only 6 inches of ground clearance. In 1996, such warnings were rare on tourist maps. In the afternoon, the family reached the abandoned mining camp of Warm Springs. Here, in a small dusty room, there was a visitor's book. Cornelia left a note indicating that they were heading through Mangle Pass. This logbook, discovered only in October, would become a crucial clue in understanding their route. Here, in a geological hut near Warm Springs, they took an American flag, a souvenir that would later be found in the minivan. This impulsive act reflected their carefree mood, the mood of people who did not realize that they were teetering on the edge of an abyss. The journey continued along dirt roads. Gradually, the car began to shake on the bumps, and the wheels sank deeper and deeper into the sand. The moment came when Egbert had to admit that the road was becoming impassable for their vehicle. They approached Mangle Pass, but the steep climb, littered with boulders, made it clear that the minivan would not be able to continue. After turning around, the family was faced with a dilemma. Should they return to the main road via the same difficult route, losing a precious day, or should they try another route that looked promising on the map? At the intersection of dirt roads, far from civilization, Egbert chose to turn south toward Anvil Canyon, instead of returning by the familiar route. This choice proved fatal. The canyon, with its steep walls and sandy bottom, was impassable for a regular minivan, even though it looked passable on the map. Soon the road deteriorated. The canyon narrowed and the sand became loose. At a fork, weary from the long day, Egbert turned right, even though the main road went left. Here, the road quickly disappeared into a sandy ruts. Trying to turn back, he got stuck, and both rear tires burst from overheating. With desperate determination, Egbert drove another 200 feet or so on the damaged wheels until the minivan finally got stuck. By this point, one of the front tires had also gone flat. The car was stuck 2 miles from the start of the canyon. Night brought cool air, but also the realization of their situation. They were deep in Death Valley, with 3 flat tires, dozens of miles from a phone. The minivan was their only refuge from the heat, but every hour they waited reduced their chances of making it back to Los Angeles in time. On the map, they noticed the China Lake Naval Weapons Center 9 miles to the south. For Europeans accustomed to patrolled military installations, this might have seemed like salvation. Now, Egbert and Cornelia faced a decision that would turn a routine mishap into a mysterious tragedy. Dawn on July 23rd in Anvil Canyon came mercilessly early. The first rays of the sun, reflecting off the sandy walls of the canyon, turned the minivan into a red-hot oven. By 6 in the morning, the temperature inside had already reached 95 degrees and continued to rise with every passing minute. The silent presence of the dormant volcano that shaped the geology of Death Valley could be felt in every breath of hot air. The first attempt to free the car ended in disappointment. Egbert found a jack in the trunk, but the loose sand made it useless. The base kept sinking, preventing the minivan from being lifted to change the wheels. A simple operation that would have taken 20 minutes on solid asphalt proved impossible here. Water supplies became a major concern. Like most tourists, they had brought a few bottles with them, but not the canisters needed for survival in the desert. With 4 people, including 2 children, in heat exceeding 100 degrees Celsius, their supplies would last a day or 2 at most, and that was with strict rationing, which is extremely difficult to explain to a 4-year-old child. Cornelia, in her German diary, found 13 years later, made notes about the trip until July 22nd. These lines are cut off mid-sentence, the last known written trace of the family. Time was beginning to close in on them. Every hour spent in the stuck minivan reduced their chances of returning on time. In 3 days, they had to return the car to Los Angeles, and on July 27th, their flight to Germany was waiting for them. The pressure, both psychological and literal, from the hot air filling the cabin, was becoming unbearable. Georg, an 11-year-old boy, was probably the first to show signs of heat exhaustion, nausea, dizziness, and increased irritability. Little Max, too young to understand the danger, was probably suffering the most from the heat. A child's body loses fluid much faster than an adult's. Around noon, Egbert made a decision that would later be analyzed by dozens of survival experts. He decided to get out of the car and survey the area. Perhaps there was a source of water nearby, or at least a hill from which he could see the road and potential help. Walking about a mile east of the car, Egbert stopped under a sparse bush that provided at least some shade. Here, in the desert, as traces found later showed, he sat for some time, perhaps thinking about what to do next, or simply regaining his strength before returning to his family. An empty Bud Ice beer bottle found at this spot indicates that physical thirst overcame common sense. Alcohol only increases dehydration in hot conditions. From this point, there was a view of the eastern part of the valley. Perhaps it was here that Egbert first realized how far they were from civilization. 16 miles to the nearest paved road, Badwater Road, and that was as the crow flies, across barren land with no trails or landmarks. The view to the south, however, offered a different perspective. Somewhere out there, 9 miles from their current position, was the boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. To a European unfamiliar with the peculiarities of American military installations, this might seem like a logical place to seek help. Returning to the minivan, Egbert faced a harsh dilemma. Staying in the car meant slow but certain exhaustion under the scorching sun, with dwindling water supplies and no guarantee that anyone would drive down this deserted road. There was little hope of a quick rescue, even if Heike had reported the family missing on the day of the missed flight. July 27th, a search in such a vast area could take weeks. The alternative was equally risky. Leave the relative safety of the car and set out on foot across the unforgiving desert toward a hoped-for rescue. Contrary to all the rules of survival in the wild, Egbert, probably after agonizing hesitation, chose the second path. Preparations for departure were minimal. The family took only the bare essentials: Cornelia's passport and bank card, her diary, some personal items, the remaining water, and possibly a little food. What little Max was wearing and what they took to protect themselves from the scorching sun is unknown. The minivan was neatly locked, as if they planned to return. Inside were a sleeping bag, a tent, toys, and other non-essential items. The decision to leave at noon, when the temperature was at its peak, seems irrational, but in a situation of growing panic, logic often takes a back seat. Perhaps the trigger was the condition of the children, which was deteriorating by the hour in the sweltering car. Maybe Egbert hoped they could cover enough distance before nightfall. The route they chose led south, straight to the military base on the map. It was a route that 13 years later would prove key to solving their disappearance in Tom Mahood's hypothesis. For a European accustomed to densely populated areas, 9 miles might seem like a surmountable distance, but in the conditions of Death Valley, with sand temperatures reaching 180 degrees and air temperatures around 107 degrees, every mile became an exhausting ordeal. Imagine 4 people, 2 of them children, slowly moving across the open desert under the merciless sun. Without hats or special clothing, with minimal water supplies, they were probably already suffering from the early stages of heat stroke. Every few hundred meters they had to stop to catch their breath or let the younger ones rest. Progress was painfully slow. The fact that the family did not return to the car suggests that as they progressed, they either lost their bearings or were physically unable to turn back. With each step forward, returning to the minivan became less and less of an option. The desert is unforgiving to the human body. At temperatures above 105 degrees Celsius, the body's cooling mechanisms begin to fail. Profuse sweating is quickly replaced by dry skin due to lack of water. This is followed by heat exhaustion, dizziness, nausea, and muscle weakness. For Max, a 4-year-old boy with an undeveloped thermoregulation system, this process was accelerated. Children his age lose moisture 2 to 3 times faster than adults. It was probably only a couple of hours into the journey that the adults had to carry him. Georg, 11, was more resilient, but also critically vulnerable to heat. His European body, unaccustomed to extreme temperatures, could not cope with internal overheating. Examination of the remains found in 2009 revealed no evidence of violence or trauma. The family died of natural causes, heat stroke, and dehydration. Behind this dry statement lies the unimaginable drama of their final hours. The final stage of heat stroke is accompanied by disorientation, hallucinations, and loss of consciousness. The internal body temperature rises above 105 degrees Celsius, causing internal organs to fail. Reality mixes with delirium, and the surrounding landscape becomes distorted. Despite these conditions, the family managed to travel about 6 miles. The place where their remains were later found is a testament to incredible human endurance, even in extreme circumstances. They moved almost perfectly in a straight line toward the border of a military base. This determination suggests that even in critical conditions, Egbert maintained a clear mind, possibly using the sun or distant mountains for orientation. Among the items found near the remains was an empty wine bottle, identical to those found in the minivan. In desperation, they may have drunk anything that could quench their thirst, even if it only accelerated dehydration. The absence of any traces of a camp or shelter indicates that the family continued on until the very end. At some point, they simply could not go on. The location of the remains suggests that they died close to each other, perhaps trying to shelter from the sun. They remained together until the very end, like a real family. The exact moment when the lost tracks of the German family ended in the desert will forever remain unknown. From a scientific point of view, their bodies, deprived of water and exposed to extreme temperatures, could not have functioned for more than 48 hours. It is likely that by the evening of July 24, 1996, all 4 had already left this world. Death Valley took them into its embrace as silent witnesses to its unyielding power. The inexorable laws of nature, which the German tourists so tragically underestimated, prevailed over the human will to survive. In the open space, 6 miles from the minivan and 3 miles from the military base, they became part of the desert. After their deaths, the desert continued its work. The scorching sun, dry air, and sandy winds accelerated the natural processes. Wild animals, coyotes, vultures, small scavengers, gradually scattered the remains over a small area. Personal belongings, Cornelia's passport, her bank card, her diary, remained untouched, preserved by the dry air, but gradually became covered with a thin layer of sand, blending into the landscape. Paradoxically, while the family itself had disappeared without a trace, the minivan they had rented stood motionless in the same place where they had left it. Locked up, with their belongings inside, it could have stood there for years, slowly deteriorating under the sun and sandstorms, but still recognizable. In a remote canyon, rarely visited even by rangers, it could have remained unnoticed for a long time. Days, weeks, months passed. July 26th, the day the minivan was supposed to be returned to the rental agency in Los Angeles, passed without any word from the renters. On July 27th, the family did not show up on their flight to Germany. Only then did the search mechanism slowly begin to kick in, but precious time had already been lost. While Heike Weber, Egbert's ex-wife, reported her former husband and son missing, bureaucratic procedures between the German and American authorities took weeks. It was not until September 10th, almost 7 weeks after their disappearance, that the Los Angeles Police Department registered the Plymouth Voyager as stolen. By this point, the family's traces in the desert had been almost completely erased by wind and time. Even more time passed before anyone found the car itself. It was not until October 21, 1996, during a routine aerial reconnaissance, that a Death Valley Ranger noticed the sun reflecting off the roof of a stranded minivan. By this time, almost 3 months had passed since the family's disappearance. The green Plymouth Voyager, covered in dust and with 3 flat tires, looked like a foreign object amid the pristine landscape of Anvil Canyon. Landing nearby, the ranger discovered that the car was locked and personal belongings were visible inside. A check of the license plate revealed an alarming fact. The car had been reported stolen. This discovery launched one of the largest search operations in Death Valley history. More than 200 people, rangers, specialists from the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group and Indian Wells Valley Search and Rescue, and Inyo County sheriffs, combed the area. 2 helicopters surveyed the area from the air while ground teams on horseback searched the canyons and ravines. A check with $rent-a-car revealed that the minivan had been rented by Cornelia Meyer on July 8th and was due to be returned on July 26th. The renters did not show up for their flight to Germany on July 27th. Now the searchers knew who they were looking for. 34-year-old Egbert Rimkus, his 11-year-old son Georg, 27-year-old Cornelia Meyer, and her 4-year-old son Max. The clues were scarce. A Bud Ice beer bottle and traces of a seat under a bush were found a mile from the minivan, and German canisters were discovered 3 miles to the southeast, although this finding remained unconfirmed. Searchers focused on the area around Anvil Canyon, Warm Spring Road, and Mingle Pass. The China Lake Base, 9 miles to the south, was not included in the main search area. After 5 days of fruitless searching, the operation was called off on October 26th. The family was declared missing and presumed dead. In the absence of remains, various theories emerged, ranging from a staged disappearance due to custody disputes to kidnapping, and even an encounter with desert cultists. But the facts contradicted most of the speculation. Bank cards were left in the minivan, which was locked and abandoned. Everything pointed to an accident, but without bodies, the case remained open. In any disappearance story, there is always the possibility that someone will continue the search even years later. For a German family in Death Valley, that person was Tom Mahood, an engineer and member of the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit, who in 2009 became interested in the 13-year-old case. Mahood, with his analytical mind, approached the mystery as a mathematical problem. After gathering all the available data, reports from 1996, the minivan's coordinates, information about the Bud Ice bottle that was found, he began to construct a new hypothesis. In September 2009, after completing a special course in tracking people with the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group, he had the opportunity to talk to participants in the original search. On October 27, 2009, Mahood began his own field investigation. He visited the site where the minivan was found, reconstructed the family's potential routes, and, after analyzing the maps that might have been available to Egbert, came to a realization. He hypothesized that the family, stuck in Anvil Canyon and seeing the China Lake base on the map, may have decided to walk there, hoping for military patrols typical of European military installations. On November 11, 2009, along with his colleague Les Walker, Mahood set out to explore the area south of where the minivan was found, a direction that had not been thoroughly checked in 1996. When Walker reported over the radio that he had found a wine bottle and then a German daily newspaper, they knew they were on the right track. Soon they discovered skeletal remains, among them Cornelia Meyer's wallet. Their find, handed over to the authorities, shocked everyone involved in the 1996 search. The remains were found about 6 miles south of the minivan, directly on the way to the China Lake base, as Mahood's hypothesis had predicted. Among the items were Cornelia's passport, her bank card, a German diary with notes about their trip, and a bottle of wine identical to those found in the minivan. DNA analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Egbert Rimkus and Cornelia Meyer. On December 6, 2010, additional remains, believed to be those of a child, and a small shoe were found, although due to severe decomposition, DNA identification was not possible. Nevertheless, the location of the finds and the analysis of the shoes left little doubt that these were the remains of Georg and Max. After 13 years of uncertainty, the case was effectively closed. Mahoud's hypothesis that the family had tried to reach a military base was accepted as the most likely explanation. Their remains were returned to Germany, where the families were finally able to give them a dignified farewell. The tragedy of the German family in Death Valley led to important changes in the park's information policy. By 2010, stricter warnings about summer hazards had been introduced, and multilingual materials, including German, had been produced specifically for foreign tourists. The park began working with GPS companies to remove impassable dirt roads, such as Anvil Canyon, from navigation systems. However, the most important lesson of this story was the confirmation of the golden rule of desert survival: never leave your vehicle. If Egbert, Cornelia, Georg, and Max had stayed with their minivan and waited for help, despite the heat and limited water supplies, their fate might have been different. Instead, they gave in to panic and underestimated the harshness of the desert, taking a step that turned a potentially survivable situation into a final tragedy. The story of the Germans in Death Valley, as it is often called by rangers, has become a warning to all future visitors to this harsh but beautiful place. It reminds us that even in today's world of technology and comfort, nature remains a force to be reckoned with, demanding respect, preparation, and common sense from those who venture into its territory. For tourists driving along Death Valley's main road today, information signs warn in several languages. In case of breakdown, stay with your vehicle, and heat kills. Perhaps these simple warnings, if they had been as numerous in 1996, would have been enough to change Egbert Rimkus's decision at that critical moment under the scorching sun of Anvil Canyon. The story of the German family in Death Valley is not just a tragedy, but a frightening reminder of how thin the line is between adventure and disaster. 4 people full of hope for a dream vacation were confronted with the merciless force of nature, which does not forgive mistakes. Their desperate attempt to reach safety despite the heat and dehydration is both inspiring and terrifying. But questions remain unanswered. Why did Egbert decide to leave the minivan, breaking the most important rule of the desert? Was it panic, false hope of finding a military base, or something else? Could they have survived if they had stayed with the car, as the rangers advised? And how far would your own determination go in such a situation? Would you risk everything or wait for help, despite the scorching heat around you? What does this story say about us as people? Do we succumb to the romance of adventure, ignoring warnings? Are we capable of learning from the mistakes of others? Or must each of us walk our own path to understand how fragile life is? Psychologists say that in extreme conditions, it's not the strongest who survive, but those who keep a clear head. Could you keep your wits about you while watching your loved ones fade away under the scorching sun? If you like this story, be sure to like the video. Your support directly affects the frequency and quality of the material. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next episodes.